Thank you for selecting the Commission on Sentencing's Basics Overview module, which covers guiding principles of the sentencing guidelines and basics of sentencing enhancements. This information is important in understanding the reasons for sentencing guidelines, as well as how sentencing enhancements are achieved and implemented by the Commission. This update was created in April 2020 and is intended as a brief overview. More detailed information can be located on the Commission's website under the Sentencing Guidelines section or by contacting a member of the Education and Outreach Unit. It is helpful to be reminded of several guiding principles or foundations of the sentencing guidelines. Listed are three principles: a common starting point, a typical sentence and typical offender, and the advisory nature of the sentence recommendation. Let's begin with a common starting point, often referenced as the heartland or safe harbor. Prior to the creation of the Commission in the late 1970s and the subsequent adoption of sentencing guidelines in the early 1980s, Pennsylvania did not have sentencing guidelines. As such, it was not uncommon to see courts throughout the Commonwealth sentence differently for similar crimes and situations. With the development and adoption of sentencing guidelines, courts now have a common starting point based on the offense gravity score of the conviction offense and the defendant's prior record score based off prior adult convictions and certain prior juvenile adjudications. Guidelines apply to all misdemeanor and felony convictions sentenced in a court of record. This brings us to the second principle listed: typical sentence and typical offender. With 67 counties, it was not surprising to find sentencing practices varied among the Commonwealth. Through the use of OGS assignments and prior record scores, the sentence recommendations not only created a heartland for the courts, but it ensured that similarly situated individuals, those convicted of similar crimes with similar criminal histories, would have a same starting point. A typical sentence for a typical offender is represented by the Commission's standard range. However, the Commission recognizes facts beyond the severity of the conviction offense, and criminal history may be considered in the sentence calculation by the court. Which leads us to the final principle noted: the advisory nature of the sentencing guidelines recommendation to the court. Yes, sentencing guidelines must be considered by the court. However, the court has the discretion to deviate from the sentence recommendation. With the starting point being the standard range, courts may consider aggravating and mitigating circumstances, which increases the gap between the lower and upper limits of the sentence recommendation, ultimately providing more room for the court to fashion a sentence and conform to the guidelines. Depending on the grade of an offense, the OGS assigned, and the prior record score, the mitigated and aggravated ranges can provide large discounts to the standard range or increases. If the court sentences outside, above, or below the sentence recommendation, the Commission considers this a departure. Again, guidelines are advisory, and the courts may depart. Reasons for doing so must be stated and submitted to the Commission. Courts can deviate from the guidelines in two main ways: by disposition, for example, a community supervision sentence, in other words, probation, or a sentence of incarceration, and by the duration of the sentence imposed. For example, if an individual is sentenced beyond the sentencing recommendation. As you can see, the Commission has had numerous amendments to the recent edition of guidelines over the past 8 years. Currently, we are in the 7th edition, Amendment 5 guidelines. You might ask, why are there so many amendments? To answer this question, we like to raise 3 prominent reasons for an amendment. First, the General Assembly often mandates the Commission to develop and adopt sentencing enhancements for various reasons. To date, the Commission has well over 15 sentencing enhancements for various behaviors, such as committing an offense with a deadly weapon, delivering drugs in a school zone or to a minor, and homicide by vehicle while in a work zone, just to name a few. In order to respond to the legislative mandate to develop enhancements, the Commission must amend the current edition of the guidelines. Since the 7th edition became effective, the legislature has turned to the use of sentencing enhancements more often than in prior editions. Thus, you are seeing more frequent amendments to the existing edition of the guidelines. Second, The legislature creates new offenses and modifies existing offenses. The Commission's enabling legislation provides a duty to promulgate guidelines where there is discretion to the court. As a result, when the legislature creates a new offense or modifies an existing offense, the Commission has a responsibility to review the offense and assign an offense gravity score. The Commission is a legislative agency. Therefore, before changes can be made, public hearings must be held. On average, the process of reviewing offenses, assigning OGSs, and following the Commission's public policy process, changes to the guidelines, which include new sentencing enhancements, generally takes 9 to 12 months before taking effect. When considering OGS assignments for new or modified offenses, please keep in mind the Commission's Omnibus OGS policy. This policy fills the gap between when a new offense or a modified offense is made effective by legislation and when the Commission's OGS assignments take effect. Last, with any amendment to the guidelines, there is an opportunity for the Commission to clarify or modify any existing policies. The Commission frequently uses amendments as a way to do just that. Part of the Education and Outreach Unit's role is to provide feedback from practitioners to Commission members, in particular in areas that are unclear or for policies that should be revisited. Now, let's discuss how the Commission achieves sentencing enhancements. This is a question we often receive, and it is worth shedding light on. The Commission generally achieves enhancements in 3 ways. One application is through adding months to the standard range. For example, you might look to the deadly weapon enhancement or the Commission's youth school zone enhancement. Another application is through increasing the OGS for a specific offense based on certain sentencing factors being present. For example, the sexual abuse of children enhancement employs this method based on the nature and character of abuse depicted. It might be helpful to think of both enhancements, the increase in months to the standard range and the increase in an OGS based on certain factors, as mechanical in nature, in that they require an individual to actively apply the adding of months or adding of OGSs. And finally, the Commission may assign a specific OGS to achieve a particular enhancement, which we often refer to as being baked into the assignment. These enhancements are not as easily identified, but they do exist. For example, a sentencing enhancement for homicide by vehicle when the violation occurred in an active work zone is achieved through this method. By simply selecting the offense from the Commission's offense listing located at Section 303.15 or through the use of the Commission's online sentencing software, SGS Web, the enhancement is built directly into the OGS assignment. In summary, we have covered guiding principles of the sentencing guidelines and basics of sentencing enhancements. Again, this information is important in understanding the reasons for sentencing guidelines, as well as how sentencing enhancements are achieved and implemented by the Commission. For information on changes reflected as part of Amendment 5 to the 7th edition Sentencing Guidelines, please view the Amendment 5 Overview module. As with all of the Commission's trainings and seminars, we value your feedback. Please feel free to submit comments or questions related to this module via email to Ryan S. Myers, Manager of Education and Outreach. Contact information for Ryan and members of the Education and Outreach Unit can be found as part of this module or by visiting the Commission's website at pasentencing.us. Thank you for taking the time to view this module. Have a great day.